Hello, I'm Simone Curzi and I'm going to show you the latest version of my Threats Manager tool. Let's start with an example. This example is a threat model made with the latest version of Microsoft Threat Modeling tool, which is 2016 at the moment. The tool, the example that we have is a simple three-tier application. We have an external user which interacts with a front end, which we can consider, for example, a web application that is exposed on internet, and this front end talks with three web services which are in the back end. Naturally, we have a transboundary between the front end and the web services because the front end is directly exposed and therefore it is less trustworthy than our web services. Those web services talk with a SQL database which contains also an audit log for the application, and they write and get information from the SQL database. On the other hand, we have web service A and B, which talk with an authorization provider, which is used to provide authorization to do some task. And also we have a web service A, which talks with an external web service. Now this is a very simple model. And we can see that this model does not have does not go in deep with the architecture. It is a very high level model. Even if it is so simple as a model, it really has a number of threats. Those threats are automatically generated. And they are automatically generated by using the default template provided with the Microsoft Threat Modeling tool. Now, those threats are generated based on a number of predefined threats, and this means that we have multiple occurrences of the same threat. For example, we can see that we have a cross-site request forgery by clicking on the first cross-site request forgery threat. This threat involves communication. It regards the communication between the external human user and the front end. We have another occurrence of the same threat between the front end and web service A, which is internal to the solution. Naturally, not all threats are born equal. The context is really important, and this is important also to understand what mitigation you need to implement. Let's consider another example: cross-site scripting. In this case, we have a similar situation. We have the first occurrence that involves essentially communication through internet. So we have the highest risk here. Let's consider, for example, cross-site scripting. In cross-site scripting, we have the similar situation in which we have a communication between the human user and the front end through internet, and other situations where the communication is only internal. We could do the same analysis in other cases. Data flow sniffing, for example, between the human user and the front end, and also internally toward the external authorization provider or the web service, and so on. Now, sometimes it happens more often than not. Mitigations are very similar. For example, for data flow sniffing, the most important mitigation that you can do is to encrypt the channel, and this would be implemented in a similar way, independently on the specific scenario, particularly if we are talking about web services. In that case, HTTPS could be the right answer. Now, in this case, so the mitigation will be the same, and I could mitigate the very first occurrence, and then I could simply copy and paste the mitigation to all the other occurrences, and it will be enough. There are other situations in which this is not correct. We have to consider the different scenarios, and we have to define different mitigations. This means that it takes time to mitigate all the threats, and on average, I have seen during my threat modeling exercise, by using simply the threat modeling tool and doing this copy and paste and adapting the threat would imply doing about 40 threats per day. Now, in this case, we have about 150. This means that I will need to dedicate 4 man-days to work, provided that we have only one doing the actual mitigation. Typically, this is not the case, because you will need to involve the architect, you will need to involve developers to really understand what the technology, what the solution could do, and therefore what is the best mitigation for that specific scenario. Now, this means that those 4 days for the mitigation are not really 4 days, but can be much more. They could be 10 days, 16 days. So the cost of doing an actual mitigation, even if you are working with a very simple scenario like this one, could be huge. So how can we do an actual mitigation in a more efficient way? Well, the answer is Threats Manager. Threats Manager, this is the latest version. The Threats Manager is a tool that is able to open documents created by Microsoft Threat Modeling tool, and is able to allow a simple mitigation of the threats, much more efficient that you could do by using simply the threat modeling tool. The new version of the Threats Manager has been integrated with exceptionless to provide some information about the usage and about the errors that may occur in the application. For this reason, when you open it for the first time, before it starts sending information to exceptionless service, it will request you a consent to consent sending this information. But before clicking yes, what are the information that I will receive? Let's see an example. This event has been generated for me, and it has been generated automatically after I have started yes. You can see important information here, essentially when the event occurred, and you can see where is the event occurred. In this case, you can see also the geography, and it is inferred based on the IP address. So it is not necessarily correct. In this case, it is not. You can see also the name of the user that has executed, that has opened the application. This is the current username. You can see events, other event information in the session, and environment information, like the name of the machine, characteristic of the system, the operative system, and perhaps this is the most important information considering the privacy. You can see the command line. Now, the new version of Threats Manager allows starting Threats Manager by double-clicking on the company file. Threat Manager generates files associated to the actual threat model file from threat modeling tool. Those files can be contain some additional information that essentially are needed by Threat Manager. Currently, it contains the position of some tags that you can put in the document. Now, that file can be, you can double click on that, and it allows to open automatically Threat Manager. If you put a name that discloses, for example, the name of your customer, then I will see that name. So if you do not want to let me see that information, simply open directly the Threats Manager and open the file from here. I will not see the name of the file. Now, if you decide not to accept this consent, not to accept that I will see that information, you simply click no, and the Threats Manager will be closed. If you decide that you're okay, you can click yes, and now your decision is stored in the registry for you, and every time you will use the same version of the application, you will not see again that message. If another user starts Threats Manager on the same box, you will see the consent again, because the consent is associated to the user. And if you install a new version that I have not yet produced in your machine, you will need to give the consent again. Okay, so let's start with the application. Let's see, let's open first the document that I have just created. Now, after I have opened the document, I see the name of the model in the title bar, and I see that two panes are populated. The upper pane contains the threats. Essentially, those are the type of threats that are defined within the template, within the document. And I can click on the middle bar to focus on that information. Okay, let's open one. You see that with this sample model, I have 10 instances of this type of threats, of the spoofing. And I can see for each one, each instance, its detail. For example, I can see the name of the page, the flow that is associated to the threat, the source, the target, and who changed that information. This is the first time I am opening the document. It has been just created, so I can I cannot see that anyone has changed the threat. If I needed to have information about the flow or the source of the target, I can simply click on those little buttons, and I will get all the details about the item, the selected item. So I do not need to return to the threat modeling tool, essentially. Now, if I open again the lower part, I see that by simply clicking on a line, I can see the details, and I can change those. I can change the status. I see all the potential status. I can see the title. I see the categories that are defined. I can change that. I see the description, justification, and priority. Okay. I see also that there are those little question marks near the threats, the threat types. Why? Because those question marks allows me to handle better priorities. I can prioritize essentially. I will see the process of prioritization in another video. I will describe that. So how can this model simplify? Can this tool simplify for me mitigation? Let's start, for example, by applying a simple justification here. Let's say that, for example, this is mitigated, and I could say that being mitigated, this one, I can change the status to mitigated. As soon as I change the status to mitigated, I see that all the information here are changed. The color of the line is changed to green to testify, to show me really visually that the threat is been mitigated. I can see the state is mitigated. I can see my name here, the date of modification, and essentially I can also see in the status bar that I have improved with my status. I see the total number of threats. I can see that one is mitigated and that the rest have not been started. So visually I have some information about the change of the status. Now I can open the context menu, and I can, for example, apply the change to everything. I will discuss in a moment the meaning of those markers. So let's say that I apply to everything. After I apply that to everything, I can see that all lines have been changed to green, and being all changed to green, essentially also the threat has been changed to green. Now you see also that the number here has changed to 1 from the question mark that it was. Why? Because at this point I have confirmed essentially that the priority is high. Initially priority is high, but the lines have not been modified, so it is something that is a default value essentially, and the application understands this, and for this reason marks all those lines with a question mark, because the high priority is the default value and it cannot trust that to be the real priority. At this point all those lines have been updated, and therefore the priority is correct, is considered correct, and for this reason all lines are high, and the threat type is considered to be the first one to be mitigated. So for this reason you have 1 here. The green simply allows you to understand what you have done, what you have already completed, so you are happy with the spoofing the target net process, and you will not have to return to it to complete the mitigation. Now if I return to the document and I click on the first line, I can see that the justification is here, and if I go to the second one, I see also that the justification is here. It has been applied to every line unchanged, so I'm happy with that. Now let's do something more complex. Let's return to the first line, and let's add for example the name of the source. So let's say this is mitigated on human user, and then let's apply again to everything. Now if I return to the second line, at this point I see that the source has not copied as it is, but the copy is marked. The copy has allowed recognizing, the application has recognized that the source has changed. Now the source is authorization provider, so I cannot see anymore this is mitigated on human user. I see that it is this is mitigated on authorization provider, and so on. The second one on external web service. The application changes considering first the source name, then the target name, then matching the flow name. So those are the different topics that are considered when it changes, it applies the change. So it is a smart copy. Let's consider another situation, another condition. Let's, for example, discuss the markers now. Markers allow you to mark lines. To mark lines to apply changes selectively. So let's consider, for example, those scenarios. We have internal communication. The first four are related to external interactor. I can see that thanks to the images. This image, the little human, means that we have an external entity with which we are talking. The piece of puzzle are this icon is to identify processes or pieces of my application. I have another type of image. Yes, like let me see, this one. Here I have the little cylinder. This one naturally is for the data storage. So essentially those icons let me understand the different types of entities very visually. Now let's say that the mitigation that are applied to human users or to external interactors are different from the mitigation that need to be applied for all the other situations when I have internal communication. So I can mark, for example, the first four with gray. Okay. Now the color of markers is really not meaningful. It is for you. It is for you to have a different type of markers. You are not not required to use gray for when you have external interactors, or blue or everything. I could have used green, no problem. So please use every color you want. What does help you to do? This helps you to simply decide that some mitigation will be applied, for example, only to green, or to everything but green. So you can decide to apply mitigations in a very selectively way. Let's, for example, mark this as needs investigation, and at this point I can say, okay, this change must be applied only to green. So the change is applied selectively. Now I can have a situation where I have a change that must be applied to everything, to all those internal communication in this case, but a specific one. For example, this one I do not want to receive any change, so I can set mark as block. In this case I can change, for example, to not applicable, and this change the color of the line, and I can go and change to everything but green or blocked. So the change has been applied to everything, as the green marked ones have not been changed, but only those that are not marked, essentially. The block marker is the only one that will not receive any update. No update will be applied, you see, to block it. So this is useful when you want to preserve essentially line. If you decided to remove a marker, simply click clear mark and the marker will be changed. Now those markers are essentially the information that are stored in the companion file that I discussed with you some minute ago. Now you see also that the line has changed color. It is not a green, complete green. I can show you the difference by putting this to mitigated and applying to everything. You see that the color is different. This is a visual clue to you to understand what has been already processed, but needs some additional information, some additional work later on. Now, this is essentially the process of applying the mitigation. The newest version of Threats Manager has implemented some ways to improve the efficiency of the mitigation activities. Let's click on an edit box, and so on a text box. In this case, I can see all the voices active. So I can essentially insert the flow name, insert the source name, insert the target name in the text. I can cut, copy, paste, and select all with the usual shortcuts. It is important to note that shortcuts like Ctrl-ins to paste are not supported. So the application supports only those shortcuts. Let's see, for example, some of those. The insert flow name, you see, in this case applies automatically, copies automatically the flow name. I can also use the insert source name, and again I can see the source name here, and the insert target name, this is the target. So I can use this to essentially apply this information where I want very fast within my text. Now let's copy, as I did previously, and if I go, I see that the information are changed automatically through this smart copy. Okay, so other ways to simplify your job. Essentially, if I open another threat type, I can select that, and at this point I can, for example, set the threat as modified. The Ctrl, Shift, and M. This is useful because if you have the priority that is high and you want to maintain this to high, by simply clicking the priority, the Ctrl Shift M every time, actually using the shortcut with the keyboard is much easier, you can essentially apply, you can mark the topic as changed, and in this allows the application to update the priority. Essentially, this is the need for this function is that one. So let's do the Ctrl Shift M on every line. Just another thing, if I copy to everything but blocked, you see that not every line receives essentially the update. This is because the text does in some cases it does not doesn't change. In these cases, the text is not changed. In those other cases, the text is changed, so the marker essentially has been applied. The change has been applied by doing that copy, but it is not does not happen every time. Why it has changed in this case? It may happen because the threat modeling tool does not apply modification to some field when you change the name of the entity. Therefore, it may happen that the title, for example, does contain, in this case, generic process or whatever. So it will not match, and it will not be changed accordingly. So let's do in this case the Control Shift M, the Control Shift M action, and I have changed all the priorities. In this case, having done this, I have that the priority of the entire line has changed. So this allows me to prioritize essentially the lines. The idea is to do a first sweep of all the threads by setting the priorities. This allows me to have a prioritization of a thread type. I will go to the first indicated by 1, and then I will address all the thread type indicated by 2, and so on, until I arrive to my goal. There is this bar which is filled, and shows you the actual percentage of work that has been done. And a certain point, when you reach your goal, you are set. You have already completed all the most important threads for you. And at this point, it is recommended to do a last sweep of the thread to ensure that what you haven't addressed doesn't that you are not leaving out high priorities threads, because it may happen that there is, for example, one high priority in the single for this thread type, and being all the other thread of a lower priority, the thread type is not an overall priority that allows you to do that as a whole, but that single thread must be addressed because it is an high priority. So that said, let's see at this point the options. Now the options of the tool, you have here the toggle of the smart copy. You can decide to simply disable the smart copy function if you feel like not having this copy with changing the text. You can also have strict checking. Strict checking means that you will change the smart copy will consider essentially the case of the text. By default, it doesn't consider the case. So if you have a text with different casing, it will be matched, no problem. By default, strict checking is not enabled, so it does not consider the case. Then you have a couple of voices about completeness. Those topics, these voices, completeness threshold, the completeness method, control the completeness bar, which is here. The completeness threshold considers the percentage of completeness that you must reach to consider the job as done. If you reach this completeness threshold, near the bar will apply a text showing you that your job is done. You can stop. And then you have the completeness method. The completeness method allows you to decide what is considered complete. By default, you will consider mitigated and not applicable threads, but you could consider only the mitigated threads, or all threads but not started. So you can decide what is completed for you. Then you have settings for the backup, for the copies, essentially. You can have multiple copies of your file, meaning that when you save the file, the tool, if you have smart backup on, will create a new file which is which will not overwrite the old one, and the name of the new file will be exactly the same of the original one, plus a suffix that will contain the date and hour when you have saved the file. And you can decide how many versions you maintain. If you have 0, then every version will be maintained, so there will be no cancellation of the copies. So let's consider other configuration. The properties. In the properties you have the possibility to decide which properties will be copied when you do the cloning, essentially. So when you do that smart copy that we have seen, you can decide not to copy everything. By default you will copy everything, but you can decide. You can preserve, for example, the value of the title or the value of the category if you want. And in the bottom part you can define which is the priority for you. By default the priority is priority, and also you can decide how you will analyze, how you will decide which thread type is greater. Essentially there is an algorithm which assigns to each thread in a thread type some points based on the value of the priority. In this case, by default, I have assigned to high 4 points, to medium 2 points, and to low 1 point. So, if you have three threads within the same thread type which are all high, then the value will be 12. This is the basic value, and the average at that point will be 4. So essentially the average will be used to analyze, to define to give the priority number. If you have another thread type which has a lower average, then it will receive a number that will be greater. So it will have a lower priority, essentially, because the number that is assigned to the thread type describes the sequence. So you have 1 for the first threads that you have to consider, 2 for the second thread that you have to consider, and so on up to 9. Okay, so this is essentially how it is calculated. There is a bonus that is also added when the threads in the thread type are many. If you have an average number of 3 threads, for example, and you have a thread type that has 10 threads, then this thread type will have this bonus. So it will essentially have a greater chance to be analyzed, to be addressed first. This is because if you have many threads within the same thread type, mitigation will be more efficient. So this process would allow you to do first the thread types that are more essentially that give you the highest performance in mitigation. Okay, let's consider finally the other. In this case, by default, you can decide the username that is put. I have as a username I've put specified my name. If you use current user, the computer account will be used to define. This name is not the one that is sent to exceptionless. The name that is sent to exceptionless is the current account name. So if you are using administrator, you will send to me as name administrator. This name that is configured here is used only for the threads. So when you modify a thread, the user who modified in this case will be the name that you specify, or the account name you decide. Then you can here decide which markers are enabled. Markers enabled do mean that the interface will be changed to simplified in a way to show you less markers. All markers are really enabled every time, but if you, for example, decide to take out yellow and red and you save, then here you can see only the other markers, and every operation that you can do works with the other markers. So interface is simplified for you. You can decide better. Okay, so essentially this is all about the threat modeling tool. The threats manager, sorry. I want just to show you what happens when you mitigate everything. You achieve the goal. Let me simplify the goal, for example, to 20%. Now we have 7% as percentage, so let me apply mitigation to everything. Now we are at 13%. Let's mitigate this one as well. So you see, now we are at 20% and the target achieved has been highlighted. And naturally you have all the statistics here that allow you to understand where you are. So this is Threats Manager. Thank you for having seen this presentation, and enjoy!